an F-rank hero who trained hard and unlocked SS rank power to become the strongest hero. Lightning flashes and thunder rumbles in the sky as a young man suddenly gets flung to the ground. He rolls around on the dirt, struggling to catch his breath. Above him, a group of people watches intently. One of them congratulates him for the significant improvement he has made over the last 2 years. Another tells him that the E-rank exam should no longer be a problem for him. In fact, someone else comments that he would probably destroy the testing venue now. These powerful individuals radiate with energy as they assess him. Meanwhile, on the ground, the young man can't help but remark that he is still nowhere near his 4 masters level. The scene shifts to a bright, sunny day in a bustling city. Strong-looking young people are everywhere, all headed towards a large building. Inside, a lady announces that the registration for the E-rank promotion exam is currently ongoing. The young man, Rick, approaches the desk to take his exam ticket, but the girl behind the counter recognizes him. The girl, Alyssa, reminds him that they used to work together 2 years ago. She was shocked when Rick abruptly resigned from their jobs and declared he would become an adventurer. Rick looks embarrassed as he admits that starting out as an adventurer in their 30s seems foolish, especially when most adventurers started at F rank in their teens and reached E rank 2 years later. Alyssa asks him what he has been doing for the past 2 years. Rick explains that he has been training extensively with his masters. Their conversation is interrupted by a drunk man who arrives at the counter and starts harassing Alyssa. The drunk persistently asks Alyssa to go have fun with him. When Alyssa tries to reject him, he grabs her hand and tries to force her. Rick intervenes, grabbing the drunk man. Alyssa apologizes to Rick, but the drunk passes out in Rick's arms. Bystanders start wondering what all the commotion is about. Rick explains that the drunk must have consumed too much alcohol. With that resolved, Alyssa finally hands Rick his exam ticket. To his horror, he gets the unlucky number 4242. He exits the building, where the dark elf Reincarnated, one of Rick's masters, asks him how the registration went. Inside, the adventurers are amazed to see a handprint on the drunk's armor, which seems to have caused him to pass out. They recognize the drunk as the former ranker, Donald, who is wanted for assault. Alyssa recalls how Rick grabbed the drunk earlier, and wonders if he was the one who knocked him out. Meanwhile, Rick undergoes the physical examination first. Doctors assess his height and weight, surprised and concerned to learn that Rick is already 32 years old. After the physical exam, the next step is the magical exam. Examinees place their hands on a crystal ball that measures their mana, shining according to their mana levels. As the examinees start, some get D or D. They are amazed when one girl gets C+, a high aptitude for an F-rank adventurer. When it's Rick's turn, he touches the ball and a small light appears, only to soon disappear, resulting in an F grade from the doctor. Other examinees start gossiping and mocking Rick, but he ignores them and leaves. The doctor is about to call the next examinee when the crystal ball Rick used suddenly breaks. The next part of the test measures offensive ability. Examinees are tasked with hitting a glowing green column with their attack. Rick recognizes the column as a slime bag, triggering memories of his training. His master used to tell him that the basis of one's strength is their flesh. If Rick could destroy a golden slime bag with his fist, he could trust that his body was strong enough. Despite Rick's protest, as golden slimes are as hard as a dragon's fang, his master boasted about destroying 200 at once, lightly tapping a slime bag and making it explode in all directions. From that moment, Rick practiced on the golden slime bag, punching it 50,000 times a day. Back in the present, examinees hit the bag while the proctor records their results. When a young blonde 11-year-old boy is called, he confidently steps forward. He is the rumored second son of the Diamuid family, with rumors stating his magic is already at C rank level. In summary, the boy is a true prodigy. To the amazement of everyone, he starts chanting a spell and creates fire with his bare hands. He then launches an attack, producing a fist-sized fireball and shoots it at the slime bag, which promptly absorbs it. Rick is surprised at how tiny the fireball, but everyone else seems impressed by the attack. However, Rick can only think of how another one of his masters loved throwing fireballs at him. Unfortunately, his master's fireballs were the size of houses and exploded like nuclear bombs. Rick wonders if the boy just condensed his magic because they are indoors. After a few more examinees, it's Rick's turn on the slime bag. He is about to start when the proctor remarks on his age of 32. The proctor then tells him that his mana never had time to grow since he started so late, as shown by his mana results. He advises Rick to give up. Rick feels the gaze of the much younger examinees, but he remembers how he always stood up and continued his training, even with bloody fists. He doesn't understand what's wrong with becoming an adventurer at his age. Rick punches the green slime bag so hard in anger that it slams into the wall, destroying it and spraying green slime all over the room. Everyone is stunned while Rick looks at his hand and guesses that the slime bag must be defective. Meanwhile, the young boy is annoyed at Rick for upstaging him and promises to show him up at the next test, defensive magic. Unfortunately for him, Rick once again surprises everyone as he withstands the Proctor's attacks. The Proctor recognizes that Rick is still using first nature magic to block his attack and advises Rick to level it up for the next one. Rick admits that he can actually only use first nature magic. Nevertheless, he is confident in his skills. The Proctor concedes and starts casting a fifth nature magic attack. A huge cyclone of air blasts forth from the Proctor's hands, hitting Rick directly in the chest. The massive cyclone of wind even breaks the magic barriers surrounding the venue. Sylvester Urselnia, the first-ranked knight of the Royal Knights, is on the outskirts of the city and sees the shockwaves coming from the training grounds. He assumes that something terrible is happening there, so he quickly makes his way to the exam center. He learns from one of the examiners that an F-ranked weak adventurer blocked a military-grade nature magic using only a defensive first nature magic. Sylvester finds it unbelievable and assumes that the examiner is joking with him. The examiner assures him that this is indeed the case, and even shows him the profile of the examinee. Upon examining the details, Sylvester finds it even more questionable that a 32-year-old man, who was nothing more than a guild receptionist a few years ago, has suddenly become this powerful. After the defense test, the first round of exams comes to an end, and Rick heads outside with Rionette to rest for a moment. Rionette reminds Rick that the next exam will be an intelligence test, meaning it will be a written exam to measure all of the adventurer's knowledge. Rick confidently announces that he will get a 100% score in the written test, telling Rionette that just because he was a receptionist, she shouldn't underestimate his intellect. Still, all he did for 14 long years was welcome drunk, negative adventurers, which is why Rionette is skeptical of him getting top marks. Rick realizes that he cannot convince her of his intelligence, so he drops his act and tells her that he is more worried about the first round's results. Despite clearly excelling in the practical exams, his magical power of mana was ranked as an F, and he fears he will not attain a high rank. Rionette comforts him, telling him that no matter what the result might be, he should be proud of himself for showing astonishing growth in the past 2 years. The blonde prodigy, who just can't mind his own business, comes to annoy Rick and Rionette because he has nothing better to do with his life. Rick recognizes this sore loser as the so-called prodigy, but fails to recall his name. So, the boy introduces himself once again as Freed Diamuit. Rick doesn't want to be involved with any minors, as he doesn't want to get cancelled by the internet. He asks the boy why he has come here and if he has gotten lost. Seeing his angry face, Rick assumes the kid might be looking for his parents and offers to help him find them. Freed, of course, finds Rick's unintentional remarks rather insulting, and accuses him of deliberately stealing his thunder at the exam. According to Freed, it was his long-awaited dream to become the main character, and he had planned the whole year how he would show off his brilliance at this exam. But because of Rick, he failed to have a heroic debut and couldn't stand out. Seeing that the kid is almost on the verge of tears, Rick tries to calm him down, promising him that it wasn't his intention at all. While Rick is desperately trying to come to an understanding with the obnoxious kid, another person with a wacky haircut enters, accusing Rick of making children cry. This twin ponytail girl, Angelica, is apparently the elder sister of Freed and is here to protect her little brother from this scary middle-aged uncle. Freed tells Angelica that Rick was bullying him and even exaggerates that this uncle is in his 40s. Believing her little brother's words, Angelica decides to teach Rick a lesson and challenges him to a duel. She is most certainly full of herself and deserves to be humble. Rick is forced to accept the challenge, even though he doesn't want to get involved in any unnecessary fights, and is taken to the training grounds. There, Angelica officially introduces herself as a second-class knight of the Royal Knights, indicating that she is quite strong. According to Angelica, duels in this kingdom allow the winner to set a term for their victory. Her term is that Rick becomes her servant for the rest of his life. She proudly tells him that once she defeats him in the duel, she will discipline him in every possible way to make sure he never bullies children again. Rick ignores the blonde with no brains for now and asks Rionette if she knows what rank Angelica. Since Angelica is a second-class knight, Rionette assumes she is a B-ranked adventurer. This means she has the capability to defeat a high-level monster on her own without a party. Rick underestimates his own abilities and starts to think he will never be able to beat Angelica because he is just an F-rank adventurer. He isn't even sure if he will make it out alive in this duel. As he begins to panic, Rionette once again comforts him, telling him to stay calm and use the training he has been through these last 2 years. Rionette's words make Rick remember the gruesome training he endured, which terrifies him to the point of nausea. Still, Rionette continues to encourage him, reminding him that he is now a member of the strongest adventure party on the continent, the Orichalcum Fist. Thanks to Rionette's words, Rick regains his composure and prepares for his duel with Angelica. Angelica, who had been tolerating Rick's hesitation, can't wait any longer and brings out her sword, enhancing her body and weapon with magic. She dashes at him with quick speed, taking him by surprise. Not because she is extremely fast, but because she is pathetically slow. From his perspective, Angelica is running at a much slower pace than his normal running speed, making him realize that maybe B-ranked adventurers aren't that impressive. He avoids Angelica's second attack, which she assumes happened by fluke because she can't believe an F-ranked adventurer could evade her lightspeed attack. She goes for a third attack and once again disappoints Rick, who begins to think that Angelica might have made it to B-rank through nepotism or something. He does not for once consider that he might be strong. As she keeps coming at him with her snail-like strikes, Rick finally decides to intercept her. He aims for her head but misses by an inch, creating a huge crater on the ground. This makes Angelica realize that Rick is actually overpowered. She immediately surrenders, letting him win the duel. She begins to leave with Freed, but Rick stops her, reminding her of the punishment terms she had set. The loser would become the winner's servant for life. However, Angelica refuses to keep her word and makes a run for it with her brother. With the duel over, Rick wonders about the results of the first round of the exams. Rionette informs Rick that Master Bronson and the others will be coming to the guild soon. Hearing this news, Rick becomes startled again, as he doesn't want to face these scary, overpowered entities. Alyssa then informs the examinees that the results of the first exam will be announced shortly. Mono will be sent to their exam tickets, and if their tickets glow blue, it means they have passed and will participate in the mock battle for the second stage tomorrow. Rick is anxious about passing, and Rionette reassures him to have confidence. Rick thinks Rionette is very kind and would be the perfect girl for him if he were 10 years younger. Rionette playfully tells him that if he fails, they will just triple his training, which makes Rick think that would kill him. When Rick's card glows blue, he is thrilled to see that he has passed. Rionette congratulates him, and as they step out of the room, Rick detects a foul stench. A blonde playboy appears and introduces himself as Raster Diamuid, the eldest son of the Diamuid family, who governs the nobles of the north. Rick finds Raster's introduction too long to remember and mentally dubs him the playboy. Raster praises Rionette's beauty and asks for her name. After she introduces herself, he tries to flirt with her, and Rick wonders if this guy is also participating in the exam. Rick introduces himself to Raster, but Raster shows no interest in him. Raster continues to flirt with Rionette, and Rick is creeped out by his cheesy lines. When Raster asks Rionette to become his second wife, Rick steps in and claims that Rionette is his girlfriend, insisting that Raster stop hitting on her. Raster notices Rick is an exam participant and mocks him for being an F-ranked adventurer at his age. Rick retorts that it's also late for Raster to be taking the exam at his age, as he must be 25 already. Raster boasts that he made it to E rank at 14 and is currently an A-rank adventurer, here as an examiner for the second stage of the exam. He shows Rick his adventurer rank badge and tells him to go away. Raster then asks Rionette to have lunch with him, but she declines, saying she is currently dating Rick and adds that his perfume is too strong. Rick realizes the stench was coming from Raster all along. Raster leaves after warning Rick to pray he doesn't end up as his examiner. Rick hopes the same and then apologizes to Rionette for claiming she was his girlfriend. She says she doesn't mind, and that seeing him try to protect her made her happy. The scene then shifts to Raster in a bar, fuming over Rick ruining his afternoon. His younger siblings come to him, crying about being harassed by a man in his 40s. Raster gets angry at the man for making his proud family members cry. He suspects the man might be Rick and asks if they remember his participant number. When they provide it, Raster smirks. The next day, Rick is worried about the mock exam, and Rionette advises him to hold back in the fight. Rick doesn't understand what she means, but hopes Raster isn't his examiner. They then meet a man named Lynx Laro, who will be in charge of Rick in the second stage of the exam. Rick is relieved to hear this and learns that Lynx handles participants numbered 4200 and above. Rick feels lucky that his number is 4242. Lynx finds it remarkable that a 30-year-old receptionist switched careers to become an adventurer. although Rick acknowledges that he is starting late. Lynx is actually impressed and mentions that Rick's decision has motivated him as a fellow middle-aged man. Lynx shares that he also became an adventurer at the age of 24, and suggests that if Rick is entering this career in his 30s, there must be something significant he wants to achieve. Rick shares that he does have a dream and wonders how Lynx knew about it. Lynx explains that he knows because they are alike. Despite being in his 30s, Lynx dreams of becoming an A-ranked adventurer. He mentions that it took him 20 years to reach B rank, but he has no intention of giving up. The two shake hands, expressing their mutual respect and anticipation for each other's future. Meanwhile, Raster spies on them with a scheming look. As Lynx heads to the exam venue, Raster intercepts him, insisting they need to talk. Later, Rick, now in the waiting room, looks cheerful. A guild receptionist enters, announcing that Lynx Lorat, the examiner for participants numbered 4200 and above, has suddenly fallen ill. Consequently, Raster Diamuid will take over as the examiner for this group. Rionette informs Rick that Raster is the playboy from yesterday, surprising Rick. She speculates that, as a Diamuid, Raster might be related to Angelica and Freed. Rick notices that the other adventurers seem displeased by this change. He overhears them discussing Raster's prestigious noble background and his achievement of reaching a rank at 17. They call him the man of 1,000 spells and note his infamous reputation as an F-rank crusher who enjoys targeting participants who catch his eye. Rick realizes that he has more than just caught Raster's attention. The scene shifts to Raster crushing an F-ranked adventurer in the exam. A butler approaches, and Raster asks if the elite guards are ready. Back in the waiting room, Rick worries about Raster being his examiner, while Rionette questions if he really needs to be this concerned. Rick explains that after hearing the rumors, he can't help but worry. He fears failing the exam and undergoing the triple training Rionette and the others mentioned, which he believes will be his end. Rionette asks if he lacks confidence. Rick admits that starting late in this career makes him naturally insecure, as everyone constantly tells him it's impossible. Rionette suggests that he flip this around. If his confidence can be shaken by others' negativity, it can also be bolstered by their support. She reassures him of her belief in his strength and expresses confidence that he will pass the exam and defeat the playboy. She recalls always believing in him since he decided to become an adventurer and asks if he will believe in her. Rick thanks her, feeling much more confident. A shady-looking guy then approaches Rick, offering to tell his fortune if he's worried about the exam. He leads Rick to his stall and offers a free reading. Although skeptical about fortune telling, Rick decides to try it for fun. As soon as he sits down, he is teleported. The fortune teller is revealed to be Freed, who celebrates accomplishing his goal. However, Rionette destroys his setup and demands to know where he teleported Rick. Intimidated by her power, Freed starts panicking and admits that teleportation magic is complex. Even with his abilities, he can only move things up to 100 meters. He assures her that Rick should be nearby, and we see Rick just behind the exam venue. Rick, disoriented, wonders how he ended up there. He encounters some rough-looking individuals who threaten to put him to sleep. Rick thinks they might have mistaken him for someone else, but they assure him there is no mistake, identifying themselves as the elite guards of Diamuid. Rick realizes that the elite guards work for Raster, the playboy, and they intend to prevent him from participating in the exam. When Rick accuses them of using dirty tricks to stall for time, they correct him, stating that they are planning to gang up on him. They boast about their powers, claiming to be equivalent to B rankers, with some even rivaling A rankers, and prepare to attack. Rick fears this might be the end for him, and he can't believe he'll be disqualified like this. However, before the elite guards can strike, senior members of his party arrive. Rick is both relieved and terrified to see them, wondering why he isn't at the exam venue. The elite guards are startled to see a talking orc, and Rick tries to play it cool by saying he was just warming up with the guards before the exam. The elite guards don't follow along with his act, and Rick warns their leader to back off if they want to survive. One guard attacks the orc, but his sword shatters. The orc comments that while he has a decent body, his weapon needs strengthening. The guard attempts to fight the orc barehanded, but the orc breaks his hand, then heals it using magic, surprising everyone. The elite guard's leader realizes who these newcomers are, while the blonde-haired dwarf, named Mizet, steps in, offering to resolve the situation peacefully. He brandishes a weapon, revealing it to be a magic-powered gun. When the elite guards try to attack Mizet, he opens fire. Rick points out that Mizet just said he would resolve things peacefully, and Mizet retorts that it's fine since no one is dead. Another guard then takes the little girl, Eliseret, hostage to stop the others, but Rick knows this only worsens their situation. Eliseret quickly takes them out using her magic. The elite guard's leader introduces the little girl as Eliseret, a prodigious vampire mage known as the Demon Child of Ruin. He introduces the orc as Bratstina Shork, an intelligent master of support magic, and Mizet Eldwarf as a 55-year-old dwarf and the world's best craftsman, seemingly from the future. He reveals that they are all S-ranked adventurers and part of the strongest party on the continent, Orichalcum Fist, which consists only of S-rankers. The elite guards are shocked by this revelation, and their leader contemplates retirement after witnessing the strength of Orichalcum Fist. Eliseret then defeats the remaining guards, and Rick resolves to do his best in the exam to avoid her wrath. Meanwhile, Rionette continues holding Freed hostage, demanding to know where Rick was teleported. Freed insists Rick won't return, believing the elite guards have dealt with him, but Rick reappears. Rionette throws Freed aside upon seeing Rick safe, and Rick notices the damage to the wall. She explains she only cut it a little, and Rick remarks on her strength. Lynx then arrives, badly injured. They help him sit, and he reveals that Raster attacked him. Lynx explains that Raster asked about his dream, and when he shared his desire to build a school for aspiring adventurers in his hometown, Raster mocked him and beat him up, saying a third-rate adventurer could only teach third-rate students. Lynx feels frustrated and wonders if it's irresponsible for someone like him to have a dream. Rick, angered by this, encourages Lynx, saying it's never too late to pursue a dream. Despite Lynx's warning to withdraw from the exam to avoid Raster's wrath, Rick heads towards the arena, determined to face Raster. Meanwhile, Raster, learning that his elite guards failed, decides to deal with Rick personally. Rick marches to the arena, filled with rage. Afterward, the scene shifts to Raster effortlessly defeating other participants before facing Rick. An observer, Adolf, comments that this is what he expects from an AE rank exam. Adolf introduces himself and explains that there are 4 core attributes of power: strength, dexterity, mana capacity, and magic control. These attributes are crucial for an adventurer's prowess, and he has the ability to visualize a person's power cores. Adolf examines the next participant's strength, noticing the individual is below average and is quickly defeated by Raster. When he assesses Raster, he sees that Raster's mana capacity is maxed out, though he lacks in other areas. Despite this, Raster's stats are impressive for an A-ranker, straining Adolf's eyes with his strength. Adolf then notices Rick, an older examinee waiting for his turn, and becomes curious. Upon checking Rick's stats, Adolf's eyes sting even more as he sees that Rick has maxed out everything except for mana capacity. The scene transitions to Rionette in the stands, preparing to watch Rick's match. She encounters Alyssa, who introduces herself as Rick's former co-worker and mentions seeing Rionette with Rick the previous day. Rionette introduces herself as Rick's current party member. Alyssa is then invited to sit with Rionette and her friends, though she's surprised to see an orc with them. Mizet asks Rionette to sit with him, but she declines, knowing he would get handsy. He inquires about Alyssa, and after being introduced, Mizet invites Alyssa to sit beside him. However, Ryanette quickly takes Alyssa away to prevent Mizet from perving on her. When it's Rick's turn to fight, he enters the arena. Brufston, watching from the stands, wonders about Rick's performance in the exams. Ryanette confidently states that Rick will pass without problems. Alyssa, however, is doubtful since Rick's opponent is Raster, whom she describes as an ranker known for overwhelming participants unnecessarily. Brufston reassures them, believing there's no need to worry, as the match is about to start. In the stand, Angelica cheers for her brother, urging him to beat Rick. Raster is surprised to see Rick, having escaped from his elite guards, though he dismisses it as unimpressive since they are only commoners. He warns Rick not to expect the same level of skill from a refined noble like him. Rick, sensing Raster's strength, inquires why he became an adventurer. Raster explains that his talent led him to adventuring, and that being a high-ranking adventurer brings prestige to a noble. He reveals his intention to quit soon out of boredom. Rick, determined, states he will never lose to someone as shallow as Raster. Raster arrogantly tells Rick to mind his words, as he won't be speaking for long. He casts a First Nature spell as a warning shot, but Rick remains unfazed. Raster wonders if Rick is scared, while Rick calms himself, remembering Ryanette's advice to observe his opponent for the first minute. Though unsure, he decides to trust her judgment. Confidently, Raster casts a third-level magic spell at Rick, who takes it head-on, only sustaining a scratch. Alyssa is surprised, but Brufston reassures her, explaining that such a spell wouldn't affect Rick. He asks if she knows about the 4 cores of power, which she names, indicating her knowledge. Brufston elaborates that mana capacity must be trained from a young age, as it stops growing after 20. Alyssa recalls that Rick began training at 30, explaining his low mana capacity. Brufston recounts Rick's first training session, where he had to run to a nearby village with 100-kilogram ankle weights through a forest full of carnivorous beasts, needing to stay close to Brufston to survive. Brufston informs Alyssa that since Rick lacks mana capacity, they focused on training his other 3 cores. Raster attacks Rick with a 4th-level magic spell, which Rick also takes head-on. Brufston then tells Alyssa that Mizet was responsible for Rick's mana control training. Alyssa recalls how Mizet would often playfully use magic on Rick. We learn that Ryanette trained Rick's dexterity. Alyssa is surprised by this, as she assumed Ryanette was just a maid. Brufston explains that Ryanette wears the maid outfit as a hobby and emphasizes that Rick has taken all their training to heart, achieving the capabilities of an S-ranked adventurer, just like them. Alyssa is astounded to hear this, and Ryanette mentions that Rick is unaware of his own strength, largely because Brufston has always downplayed his abilities. Raster attacks Rick again with another 4th-level spell, but Rick remains unfazed. Frustrated, Raster continues to bombard Rick with spells, ending by crushing him between 2 rocks. He assumes he has won, but Rick pushes the rocks aside, infuriating Raster with his resilience. Raster attempts to punch Rick, but Rick retaliates, realizing what Ryanette meant. He observes that Raster has relied too much on his innate talent and neglected skill training. Despite his vast mana, his other skills are lacking. Rick declares that he won't lose to someone like Raster, who dismisses Rick's defiance as accidental luck. Raster then attacks with a 3rd-level magic spell using an incantation, but Rick stops it barehanded. Alyssa is bewildered, and Mizet explains that Rick used a precisely woven bit of magic, utilizing only 100,000th of the mana Raster used, thanks to his accurate mana control. Raster attributes Rick's success to coincidence and tries to attack again, but Rick punches him, mitigating the damage with steel body. Raster grudgingly acknowledges that Rick is more powerful than an E-ranked adventurer and blames his poor performance on fatigue from examining too many participants. He sarcastically comments on Rick's amazing luck for a commoner, but Rick insists it's not luck, he's using his dexterity to overpower Raster's strengthening magic. Raster scoffs, believing it's impossible for someone without mana to become this strong in 2 years. Rick explains that his strength comes from rigorous training, including being locked in a dragon's nest, swimming in paralyzing liquid until he drowned, and running through chains of explosions. Alyssa finds this hard to believe, as it would kill a normal person multiple times. But Brufston explains that Rick did die and was revived each time through quick healing. This cycle of destruction and restoration made Rick incredibly strong. Raster thinks Rick is lying and questions what kind of motivation could drive him to such extremes. Rick reveals that his dream is to defeat the world's strongest monster, Kaiser al-Sapiat. Raster and Freed laugh, believing Kaiser al-Sapiat to be a fictional character from the legend of Yamaton the hero. Brufston mentions that the goal of Orichalcum Fist is also to defeat that monster. Raster mocks Rick, saying only children dream of defeating a fictional character. But Rick insists it's none of his business. Annoyed, Raster uses a 7th level magic spell to bind Rick. Rick is surprised by Raster's ability to use 7th level magic without incantation. Raster then chants an incantation for an 8th level spell, summoning a giant tree monster under his control. His siblings cheer, thinking he will definitely win now, and the spectators are amazed to see 8th level magic. Raster declares he will make Rick grovel, while Rick prepares to use air shot. Raster ridicules Rick for attempting to counter his 8th level magic with a 1st level spell. Rick asks how much Raster has trained with the spell, and Raster smugly admits he mastered it in a few tries. Rick reveals he has used air shot 100 million times. Freed, Raster, and Alyssa find this hard to believe, thinking it impossible in just 2 years. Brufston explains that it's possible using space-time magic, which Rick employed in his training. Raster punches Rick using the tree monster, but Rick counters with his own punch, enhanced by air shot. Rick's punch manages to overpower the monster, shattering it to pieces and knocking Raster unconscious and out of the arena. The audience is astonished by Rick's victory, and Alyssa thinks he is amazing. Afterwards, Rick meets Alyssa and his party mates, who congratulate him on his win. He thanks them all, and Alyssa tells him he was absolutely amazing out there. Rick is delighted to hear this, realizing for the first time that he is truly strong. He wonders why he never realized it until now and expresses his gratitude to his party mates for everything they have done for him. They tell him there is no need for gratitude. Just then, Raster appears, barely able to walk on his own. Rick asks if Raster is wondering why an elite like him lost to a late bloomer. Raster suspects Rick is mocking him, but Rick calmly explains that while he may not be able to use many skills, he has honed the ones he can use to the highest level possible. He suggests that Raster should also start by mastering one skill and looks forward to his future growth. Raster is not happy to hear this, but declares that he will test Rick again during his next promotion exam and win that fight. He then leaves, and the scene shifts to the members of Orichalcum Fist having lunch while waiting for Rick to return with his exam results. Rick is seen waiting for his results along with the other examinees, feeling much calmer than before. Ryanette notices this and comments on it. Rick responds that he was reminded of his goal earlier and knows he is not going to fail. The story takes us back to young Rick, who is captivated by the tales of Yamato, the hero. In the stories, Rick learns that defeating the ultimate monster, Kaiser al-Sapiat, would grant access to the Akashic Record, a treasure that fulfills any wish. Even Yamato couldn't conquer this beast, but he believed that one day, an adventurer would rise to the challenge and have their wish granted. Inspired, Rick excitedly shares his dream of becoming an adventurer with his parents. However, his mother worries about the dangers of such a path, fearing for his life, while his father dismisses the idea as childish, urging him to seek a stable career instead. One day, during a routine checkup, Rick discovers he has the factor for an inherent skill. Though the doctor is unsure of what it is, Rick is thrilled, feeling a connection to his hero, Yamato, who also had an inherent skill. The doctor advises patience, explaining that the skill won't activate through mere hard work. Filled with excitement, Rick runs through the plains, dreaming of becoming an adventurer once his skill activates. The next day at school, his friends eagerly ask if his skill has manifested, but Rick tells them it hasn't, and that it might take some time. Days turn into years, and Rick's skill remains dormant. Despite his efforts, he can only manage to release a fart, much to his frustration. Years pass, and Rick's friends suggest that he should become an adventurer anyway, noting that many adventurers don't have inherent skills. Rick, however, insists that his motivation isn't money. Eventually, Rick returns home with a job offer as a receptionist for the Tiger Road Guild. His parents, relieved and proud, congratulate him on securing a stable job. Rick begins working at the guild, making friends and settling into his role. Despite his contentment, the dream of adventuring never fully leaves his heart. One day, he notices Alyssa struggling with an adventurer's request and helps her, advising her to stay calm even if tasks take time. He explains that monsters have been appearing in the city lately due to being chased out of their nests, and a quest will likely be posted soon, though it's not too dangerous. Rick's friend Zaid then bursts into the guild, proudly announcing his promotion to B rank. Rick, though envious, congratulates him. That night, Rick drinks and vents his frustrations, feeling stagnant in his receptionist job compared to Zaid's adventuring progress. Despite his stable income and lack of major complaints, he can't help but wonder how different his life could have been. Hearing a commotion about monsters in town, Rick investigates and encounters a giant troll. To his shock, he sees a girl in the troll's path and instinctively tries to shield her. As the monster advances, Rick cowers in fear, but the girl effortlessly defeats it. She thanks him for his bravery, revealing herself as Reincarnated, an adventurer. Walking together, Rick thanks her and asks if she's a B-rank adventurer. To his surprise, she denies it, revealing she's actually an S-rank adventurer, a class so elite they're managed directly by the main office. Amazed, Rick is glad to have met her. He hesitantly shares his lifelong dream of becoming an adventurer and defeating Kaiser Alsapiet, confessing his frustration over his dormant inherent skill. Reincarnated reassures him, acknowledging his courage and explaining that he should be familiar with mana capacity, which might be influencing his skill's activation. Rick knows that mana capacity doesn't increase unless trained from a young age. Reincarnated explains that an adventurer needs a certain level of mana, and since Rick never trained his, he has no chance of becoming an adventurer. Rick tries to take this news like a man, but his emotions get the best of him, and he casually asks her out to dinner. To his surprise, Reincarnated agrees, saying she has some free time tomorrow. The next day at the guild, Rick is in high spirits because of his date. Alyssa is surprised to see him so cheerful and notices his enthusiasm for work. Zaid arrives to accept his first B-ranked quest, and Rick quickly assists him, leaving Zaid bewildered by Rick's excitement. Later, Rick heads to dinner with Reincarnated, hopeful for a romantic evening. However, monsters appear in town, disrupting his plans. He's disappointed, thinking the frequent monster appearances are unusual. Finding Reincarnated battling the creatures, he realizes she doesn't need his help as she swiftly dispatches them. More monsters arrive, and Rick steps back, not wanting to get in her way. Rick is amazed by her strength. After defeating the monsters, Reincarnated senses something, triggering memories of a childhood tragedy, and her mana becomes unstable. Rick checks on her, but they're attacked by another monster, only to be saved by Zaid. Zaid jokingly tells them this isn't the place for a date, and two more adventurers join the fray. The adventurers explain that the guild issued an emergency quest due to the monster influx. Zaid advises Rick and Reincarnated to retreat, while they handle the monsters. Rick feels jealous seeing their passion for battle, but Reincarnated warns of a greater danger ahead. Rick reassures her, mentioning Zaid's B rank, but Reincarnated reveals there's a dragon nearby. She shares her trauma from a past encounter with a dragon, which disrupts her mana control. Rick can't believe a dragon is here until he sees it flying overhead. The other adventurers are also shocked, realizing the previous monsters were fleeing from it. The dragon lands, and one adventurer panics, attacking it and enraging the beast. The dragon unleashes a wind attack, knocking everyone down. Zaid recognizes their dire situation and calls for a retreat, but the dragon traps them with a barrier. Zaid and the others try to break the barrier in vain. Rick, refusing to give up, charges towards the dragon. The others question his actions, but Rick declares he'd rather face the dragon and die as an adventurer. Though he knows he can't defeat the dragon, he feels exhilarated by the challenge. He attacks the dragon with a stone, inspiring the others to join the fight, but their attacks are ineffective. The dragon breathes fire, and Zaid protects everyone with his steel body skill, though they still suffer injuries. Rionette regrets not being able to fight a dragon due to her trauma. Despite his injuries, Rick advances towards the dragon. Just as the dragon is about to crush him, Rick unlocks his inherent skill, stopping the beast. Rionette notices Rick is overflowing with mana. Rick, thrilled to finally activate his skill, declares he'll use the dragon as a test. He blocks the dragon's breath and then blasts its head off with a single punch, astonishing everyone. Rick collapses and wakes up in the hospital, his body aching. Rionette advises him to rest, as all his magic circuits are broken. Realizing he's been unconscious for a week, Rick is touched to learn Rionette waited by his side. She invites him to join her party, the Orichalcum Fist, revealing their goal to defeat Kaiser Alsapiet. She believes Rick can become stronger and fight with them, noting his courage in the last battle. Overwhelmed, Rick cries for the first time, feeling validated in his dream of becoming an adventurer. Rionette reassures him, and he weeps, reflecting on the long journey to this moment. The story returns to the present, showing Rick has passed his exam. Walking with Rionette, she congratulates him on becoming a full-fledged adventurer. Rick is grateful for everyone's help and is glad he never gave up on his dream. A few days ago, Lynx was recovering from the cowardly beating he took from Raster Dimiad. The examiner is eager to have a drink with Rick as soon as he's discharged, as they had planned before the exam. Lynx is also very interested in meeting the group Rick hangs out with, so he requests the meeting be at their residence. Rick warns him that the examiner should come with as much equipment as possible because the place is eerie. Following the adventurer's map, Lynx arrives at Arcus Theater, District Number 13. There stands Castle Weakhill, which, according to Lynx, looks like the Demon Lord's castle. As he approaches, he feels intimidated by the massive entrance gate, but eventually notices a much smaller door granting access to the interior. Upon ringing the doorbell, the large gate opens, and Rick welcomes him. Inside the daunting wall, the place is wonderful and gives a unique sense of peace. No wonder, as no monster dares approach the domain of the Orichalcum Fist. Hearing this from Rick, Lynx questions why he was asked to wear so much armor if there are no threats around. The adventurer explains it's to keep his friend from ending up in a coffin. Soon, they enter the house and are greeted by Rionette. Lynx feels honored by the presence of the elf who helped him so much during his rank promotion exam. Behind Rionette, a little girl waves at Rick, leaving Lynx puzzled about having a child in this peculiar environment. Nevertheless, he admires how healthy and happy the girl seems. However, the child casts a 6th level spell on the visitor, prompting Rick to save his life again. The adventurer scolds Elissaret, something he's done 1,000 times before for the same reason, casting spells inside the castle. The vampire complains that Rick doesn't play with her anymore, as if it were his fault. Maintaining her composure, Rionette threatens to deduct from Elissaret's food allowance to pay for house repairs, prompting the girl to throw herself at the elf's feet, begging for mercy. Rick sighs and asks the visitor for a moment to give the child, affectionately nicknamed Alice by the residents, some attention. Rick knows the little rascal will cause trouble again if left alone. Meanwhile, Rionette makes Lynx feel at home. The first thing he does is observe the view from one of the windows, certain it would take days to explore the entire area. Moreover, he can see Mizit's workshop within his field of vision. Curious, he heads down to the dwarf elf and introduces himself using his surname, Lorat, asking about the type of craftsmanship the fellow is engaged in. Mizit explains it's an ultra flame cannon number 6 and lets the visitor use the equipment against the scarecrow in the yard. According to the dwarf elf, all you need to do is focus your magic into the weapon and pull the trigger. Doing so, Lynx falls backward from the missile launcher's recoil, creating a crater where the projectile hit. Frightened by the weapon's power, he states that mass production of this armament would forever change the concept of war worldwide. Now, returning inside the mansion, he walks more cautiously after nearly dying due to a crazy piece of equipment from a dwarf elf. Peeking into one of the rooms, he sees an orc through the half-open door. Without taking his eyes off the book he's reading, Brufston invites the visitor to enter if he wishes. Embarrassed, Lynx apologizes for the inconvenience and approaches the orc, impressed by the number of books there. According to the monster, these are his quarters and private library because he feels more at peace when surrounded by books. Despite having read almost all of them, lately, the wise beast has been focusing a lot on Rick's training, which takes away some of his reading time. Knowing the orc was responsible for Gladiator's training, Lynx humbly asks this master to also work on his skills. Brufston stands up and praises the human's determined look because of its resemblance to his students. Later, Rick searches for the guest everywhere until Mizit informs him that Lynx entered the forest with Brufston a while ago. At that moment, the man panics. Being thrown off a cliff tied to 2 immensely heavy steel balls, Lynx says goodbye to his 2 daughters, Latina and Lilia. However, his fall is cushioned as he lands on some furry creature. Confused, he looks down to see Ryanette lifting a giant boar that would serve as an ingredient for dinner. After being saved by the elf, the Philheim examiner thanks her for the help. She immediately guesses that the weights on the human's feet were put there by Brufston. According to Lynx, his master ordered him to run down a cliff. Unfazed, Ryanette comments that the orc is the one who kills Rick the most in training, and Lynx pretends he didn't hear that. Behind him, Brufston appears to continue the training and drags the man into the forest. After returning from the exercises, Lorat is happy to still be alive, just like Rick, who didn't have the chance to tell him that training with the wise beast is a big problem for the unsuspecting. He also tells the guest that certain things the 3 Orichalcum members say should be completely ignored, like when Brufston claims he'll go easy on training, when Alice promises she won't do something again, and when Mizit guarantees he'll take something seriously. Speaking of the devil, the 3 are standing in front of the human, complaining about his exaggeration. However, Rick stands firm and maintains his stance, trying to keep his guest alive. Mizit asserts that Rick's mistake was precisely inviting this guest for a tour of the mansion, leaving Lynx even more terrified. Later, Ryanette serves tea to the 2 humans and informs them that dinner will be ready shortly. Noticing a vibe between Rick and the elf, Lynx asks his friend what's going on between them once she leaves. Rick thinks there's nothing special happening, especially since he's just a dull 30-year-old guy. However, Lynx points out that the age difference shouldn't matter much. For example, his wife is 20 years younger than him. Either way, he knows that nothing can be forced when it comes to love. At some point, if it's meant to be, their feelings will align, and everything else will fall into place in the blink of an eye. A bit later, during dinner, Lynx expresses gratitude for the meal, and Rick insists that his guest eat plenty, something Alice has already done, but still finds insufficient. Besides her, the other 2 Orichalcum members also want to eat or drink more, so Ryanette gets up to serve everyone. Lynx tells Rick that this is the perfect time to offer to help the elf and strengthen their bond, so Rick rushes out to avoid missing the opportunity. Meanwhile, Lynx becomes curious about the gladiator's innate ability, and Brufston explains that Rick can't activate the ability on his own, depending on certain factors for it to happen. If the man controls the awakening of brute force, he will certainly be stronger than even the members of the Orichalcum Fist. After Rick returns, the orc takes the opportunity to ask their guest, who works at the Central, if he has heard of the 6 gems of the Yamato legend. Their goal is to defeat the Orichalcum Fist. These 6 gems are magical stones that open the portal to the Spiral of Origin where Kaiser sleeps. However, these stones are only activated every 200 years, and currently, they are releasing an enormous amount of magic. The Orichalcum members are eager for any additional information. Lynx doesn't know but promises to check the confidential department to see if he can find anything. Rick then whispers to his friend that he didn't find the right moment to help his love interest because the woman is simply perfect in everything and didn't need help with anything. Hours later, at the Adventurers Guild, a woman complains about cleaning when she should be continuing her young adventurer career. Soon, she sees the Orichalcum Fist trying to take on a mission, but they need one more member to meet the required minimum number. The Guildmaster recommends they take Ray Lucas, a young girl who wants to explore the world as an adventurer. She isn't very excited to walk alongside, as she puts it, a talking orca kid and a tacky old man. However, anything is better than sweeping the floor, so she accepts the challenge and joins the group. On the way, Rick explains that they are looking for a magical stone that is extremely valuable and has the power to attract monsters. Confident in herself, Ray states that she can handle any monster attracted by the stone because she might be rank F now, but soon she'll be at the top. She asks the man's rank, and he says he is rank E. With this answer, Ray concludes that Rick is an old man who started late, so he must be ridiculously weak. Further ahead, Alice and Brufston find the magical stone behind the hills. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Mizet uses a gadget to blow wind on Ryanet's skirt to lift it. The elf quickly circles around and asks what's going on. He explains that it's a device that creates wind without using magic. Ryanet replies that it's quite interesting before destroying the device with her sword. On the road approaching the magical stones, the group encounters a wyvern, and Ray panics. Without losing his composure, Brufston slowly approaches the dragon and punches it far away. Ray Lucas complains that the wyvern's death will attract several others to the region, so the orc gets tired of her whining and tells Rick to endure her talk. Later, the man is tasked with being the girl's personal listener until they see dozens of dragons being slaughtered ahead, where Brufston and Alice are killing each one of those winged beasts. However, a red wyvern, an even stronger dragon race, circles around and lands in front of the 2 humans. As usual, Ray gives up on life and sits down, so Rick asks her to run. Not wanting to act like a coward, Ray changes her mind and decides to face the wyvern alongside her companions like Yamato would. Being a huge fan of the legendary adventurer, Rick accepts the proposal and asks the girl to provide support. She prepares a first nature composite spell, but Rick jumps ahead and smashes the beast's head. The next day, upon returning to the guild, the girl acts strange because of everything she witnessed yesterday, and the guildmaster understands why. The Orichalcum Fist is known for bringing trouble wherever they go, considering they are the most powerful rankist group on the continent. For this reason, the guildmaster tells Ray Lucas she should be content with activities that align with her limitations. However, Ray is motivated to reach the level of those adventurers and do amazing things like they do. Speaking of which, the Orichalcum Fist displays one of the 6 gems, the Crimson Flower, on their table. After finding it at the bottom of the wyvern's nest, by using the magic resonance of this stone, they will be able to find the other gems. With this intent, Mizet uses his earth mapping ability, opening a map that points to Heractopia, a country known for its Colosseum, where combat arts make the fame of this nation. The story takes us back 400 years to a small desert nation ruled by King Alexander of Heractopia. In a modest settlement called Nuki, Alexander built the Colosseum and initiated combat competitions where he fought weaponless, relying solely on his physical prowess. His record of 10,000 victories earned him the title King of Fists. a name that echoed across the continent. His fame attracted fighters from all over, each hoping to challenge the king's invincibility. As a result, Heratopia flourished into a kingdom of great renown and strength, with Newbie, the site of the arena, becoming the capital of this thriving reign. Standing before the colossal statue of Alexander, the King of Fists, Brufston expresses his regret at not being able to fight Alexander. Rick, however, thinks such a duel might have resulted in the destruction of the entire kingdom. Rionet observes that combat as entertainment remains a central tradition in Heratopia. Rick understands this well, knowing that fighting is a common profession here, and those who engage in these battles are called pugilists. With that scene where a beast woman is being harassed by a man, Brufston intervenes, but the man, unfazed, boasts that he is a pugilist and doesn't shy away from trouble. Brufston, unimpressed, points out that the bald man doesn't seem very strong, which angers the pugilist. He then challenges the orc to a fight in a nearby alley. In mere moments, Brufston defeats the man, who now agrees to answer their questions. He introduces himself as Gold, while the beast woman is named Militia. Brufston shows the crimson flower to the locals and asks if they have seen anything similar. Both Gold and Militia feel that they've encountered something like it before, but aren't sure where. Suddenly, a crowd gathers behind them, drawn to the opening show of the King of Fists tournament. Gold excitedly explains that this is the announcement parade for the city's tournament, where the victor becomes the champion of the pugilists. Militia can hardly wait for the 2 months leading up to the event to pass. This festival is so significant that around 5 million people flock to Heratopia each year to witness it. As the crowd cheers, they spot a pugilist named Kerwin Orwolf, a 5-time champion of the King of Fists tournament, with 3 of those victories being consecutive. Admiring the fighter paraded on an elephant, Gold dreams of reaching such heights someday. Militia then points out the gleaming spherical jewel on Kerwin's champion belt, noting that it looks identical to the one the group is seeking. Brufston recognizes it as the Sovereign's gold. After the parade, Kerwin heads to the academy where he trains. As he arrives, a man approaches him to express gratitude for the performance. Kerwin dismisses the praise, understanding the importance of energizing the crowd before the tournament. However, the man with an eye patch doubts that Kerwin is in top form, a claim that the pugilist denies. Meanwhile, the members of the Orichalcum Fist enter the academy, determined to find the great champion. Even the formidable Kerwin feels a chill upon seeing the massive orc. Rick tries to approach the matter delicately, but Brufston's straightforward nature prevails. The orc immediately states that the jewel on Kerwin's belt once belonged to a member of their group. If the champion agrees to hand over the relic, Brufston promises to return a jewel of equal value. The eye patch man, offended by their boldness, calls for the group to be removed, but Kerwin intervenes. He senses no deception in their words, but he firmly refuses to relinquish the jewel, explaining that the belt holds special significance for the people of Heratopia and embodies the pride of the nation. To claim the belt, one must earn it by winning the King of Fists tournament. Understanding the situation, Brufston apologizes for any inconvenience, and Rick questions if they're just going to leave it at that, as they follow the leader of the Orichalcum Fist out of the academy. The eye patch man suggests teaching these presumptuous outsiders a lesson, but Kerwin is certain that confronting them could have deadly consequences. He remarks on the maid's intimidating presence, noting her extraordinary abilities. The man, despite his ordinary appearance, seems to have trained his body to an exceptional degree, emitting an aura that's difficult to understand. Lastly, Kerwin acknowledges the orc's immense power. Outside, Brufston reveals his plan to become a pugilist and compete in the tournament to win the belt. To participate, one must pass the preliminaries held in the east and west of the kingdom and advance through the stages until reaching the final block, where the ultimate champion is determined. After the winners advance to the tournament's round of 16, Brufston leaves Rick to compete in the Western League, while he heads to the east. To avoid getting lost, the orc arranges for a personal guide named Gold to accompany Rick. Rionet then informs Rick that he needs to pass a test to qualify as a pugilist. She takes him to a simulated battle where his opponent will be randomly chosen from the new competitors. Rick asks if his opponent is strong, and the organizer tells him it's a promising newcomer who won all the preliminary matches. However, Rick can still qualify even if he loses, provided he shows a certain level of skill. Suddenly, Rick's rival introduces herself as Flash, and he immediately recognizes her voice. It's Angelica Diamuit, the spoiled noble he had defeated, causing trouble with the Diamuit family. To his surprise, it's Angelica who panics upon realizing her opponent is Rick Gladiator. In the audience, 2 old men and a few others watch the simulated battle. Angelica's beauty attracts attention, and despite her quick rise through the preliminaries, one of the old men cautions against underestimating the other newcomer, noting that upsets can happen in the tournament. In the ring, Rick asks if her older brother is in town, but she tells him she came alone, which puts his mind at ease. Meanwhile, Angelica is tense, facing the man who defeated her without breaking a sweat. Even though she doesn't need to win to advance, she doesn't want to lose this fight. As the organizer starts the fight, Angelica remembers how she underestimated Rick last time and vows to keep her guard up. She tries to use her instant step ability, but stumbles and fails, much to her surprise and embarrassment. She stands up and tries again, only to discover she didn't trip. In reality, Rick was tripping her in a way imperceptible to the naked eye. He asks if she enjoyed the skill he learned recently. According to him, this is the first of the 8 secrets of taking it easy, the leg sweep. It's a technique designed to demoralize the opponent by not letting them stay on their feet. Rick was kicking her legs out from under her, so quickly that even she, a second-class knight, couldn't see it. Trying to maintain her dignity, she attempts to keep her distance, but it's futile. As she backs away, she's swept off her feet again, landing awkwardly on the battlefield. As he continues to sweep her every time she stands up, Rick feels guilty about how easy the fight is and praises the difficulty of timing the sweeps given Flash's incredible speed. He encourages her to stay in the fight, promising to go all out now, but Angelica raises her hands and surrenders immediately. Thus, Gladiator earns his permission to compete after sweeping a noblewoman 5 times. However, she doesn't take kindly to her new humiliation by someone she considers an old man. Rick corrects her, explaining he's only in his early 30s. Angelica, now crying, asks how many times she has to be humiliated by him before he's satisfied. Rick hurriedly explains she's misinterpreting the situation, desperate to change the subject. He invites Flash to grab something to eat. By coincidence, they end up at an inn managed by Militia and her parents. After serving snacks at the pugilist's table, the cat girl asks where Brufston is and looks sad when she hears the orc is participating in the Eastern preliminaries. When the waitress leaves, Angelica asks Rick why he became a pugilist, and he reveals his goal is to win the King of Fists tournament. The girl finds his ambition offensive, but is too humble to protest. Nonetheless, she informs him it's impossible for him to compete this year, explaining that reaching the round of 16 is a long journey with insufficient time left. For instance, only those who won 40 matches in the semester gain access to the league, and the maximum a fighter can achieve is 10 matches per month. With only a week left before the tournament begins, she deems it impossible for Gladiator to make it. However, despite her lecture, Rionet announces she has scheduled Rick's 40 matches within a 4-day period, leaving Flash speechless. Later, Rick heads to his debut fight in the preliminaries and learns his opponent will be Grit Albert. The worried organizer explains that this competitor is known for breaking tournament rules by using a weapon, although no body check has ever confirmed this. Soon, Rick faces the scoundrel on the battlefield, but the man appears unarmed. In his mind, Albert sees Gladiator as an old man who gave his all to become a pugilist at this age, and he intends to crush him to make it worthwhile. To achieve this, Albert uses an impact stone in his shoe. As the fight begins, Albert throws his jacket over Rick's face to obscure his vision and punches him with all his might in the chest. After the insane impact before delivering such a powerful blow with that item, despite Albert recalling he shattered mountains with his fist, the wind formed around Gladiator's fist shakes Albert's brain until he's unconscious. With this incredible victory, the old man watching the preliminaries realizes Kerwin Orwolf finally has a worthy opponent. As night falls in a shady establishment in Heractopia, a monster named Jeff sleeps soundly among beautiful girls until someone knocks on his door, announcing it's time to work. In the preliminary eliminations of the tournament, Lampejo secured her spot with 40 consecutive victories, already setting her sights on winning the Block League matches. Meanwhile, Rick was eager to give his best. Angelica raised an eyebrow, questioning whether Rick truly intended to fight 40 times in 4 days, especially since each venue hosted only one player. This meant he would need to travel hundreds of miles to dozens of locations where the fights took place. But before Lampejo could finish her thought, Ryanette lost patience and called Rick to start the marathon, reminding him of their fight at Green Hill Arena scheduled for 10 am. Angelica panicked, shouting that the arena was 30 miles away, and that even a fast carriage wouldn't get them there in time. Offended, Gladiator responded that he was in too much of a hurry to catch a carriage, so he planned to run there instead. In no time, he sped off at the speed of sound, leaving Lampejo astonished as she struggled to accept how he defied all the laws of physics. Annette then asked if Angelica was interested in watching Rick's fight. Angelica wanted to, but had no idea how she'd get there in time. The elf offered to take her in an unexpected way by leaping between the city's rooftops at an incredible speed while carrying her in her arms. Upon reaching Green Hill Arena, Rick was surprised to find Lampejo collapsed in the backstage area. Despite being there, she hadn't managed to see the fight due to sheer panic. In any case, Rick felt somewhat relieved not to have an audience, especially since he made a serious mistake with the third of his 8 secrets, realizing that it needed some adjustments. Behind him, Ryanette reminded Rick it was time for the next fight, and he quickly headed off to his new challenge. Angelica begged to stay at Green Hill, but the elf ignored her pleas and carried her to Kolak Arena. There, Rick, the human member of the Orochokum Fist, tried to calibrate his abilities to avoid turning his opponents into mush, while still securing his victories. At Shutgat Arena, Rick circled his opponent and finished him off with a small tornado created by his movements. By the time he reached Latrina Arena, yet another opponent had fallen before the 30-year-old warrior. After the Colosseum's mad dash, Angelica could hardly believe that Rick had actually managed 40 victories in 4 days to pass the preliminaries. Sitting with Angelica in a beautiful setting reminiscent of Venice, Ryanette informed her it was time for the block leagues. Lampejo thanked the heavens she wasn't in the same block as Rick. She planned to win the tournament, but it seemed difficult with Rick participating. Ryanette reminded her that Brufston was advancing in the Eastern League, which made Angelica's hopes of winning the championship fade. Ryanette mentioned that Rick had set off for the Tronia region, prompting Angelica to curse herself for not being surprised that he was simply walking the 600-mile round trip. She then commented that people might assume she was romantically involved with Rick, but the elf, who harbored great affection for him, didn't mind. Embarrassed, Angelica pretended it wasn't a big deal. Suddenly, the establishment's manager appeared, desperate and begging the 2 ladies for help. Meanwhile, Bugs Bunny from Orochokum Fist arrived at his destination, where he was approached by a strange figure who knew his name: Snape Resurrect, the president of the Western League Management Committee. Snape greeted Rick, intrigued by his historic run through the eliminations, and mentioned that Angelica wasn't present. He explained to Rick that despite being a merchant, he had a good relationship with the House of Daimuit. Rick noticed Snape's firm handshake and deduced that he had been a boxer. Snape confirmed this, sharing that he had competed 20 years ago, winning a small competition before retiring at 23. making that victory both his first and last. Rick was curious about the reason for his retirement, but Snape had to leave. Before departing, Snape mentioned that his company had entered a competitor in the tournament and asked Rick to remind Angelica not to overdo it in the competition. After Gladiator entered the militias, she expressed concern about Rick speaking with the owner of the Dragonaut company, Snape Resurrect. While Snape might appear to be a gentleman, there were rumors that he had deep ties to the criminal underworld, and he was also the main sponsor of this year's competition. Rick mentioned that the businessman had entered a competitor in the tournament. The Beast Girl then explained that this competitor was there to fill the sponsor's slot, a position reserved for the company that financed most of the event. Nearby, two men were chatting about the high level of this year's bunny girls, particularly the newcomer, a dark elf girl. Speaking of which, Angelica and Rionette were giving their all to play the role of the event's bunny girls. Enthusiastic, Daimit lifted everyone's spirits by taking bets on who the 7 competitors would be in the King of Fists tournament. A colleague remarked that Angelica was born for this job, which frustrated her since she was doing it against her will. Rionette chimed in, saying she wished Angelica had turned down the invitation. However, Angelica couldn't bring herself to say no to a man with a bleeding forehead. Suddenly, a drunk man grabbed a bunny girl's arm and chased her away before pestering Angelica. To make matters worse, he insulted her, saying she didn't even have a decent figure. A flash of lightning struck, leaving the man on the ground. At that moment, Rick arrived and asked what Angelica was doing in that outfit. But then Rionette appeared, also dressed as a bunny girl, catching Rick's attention. Indignant, Angelica questioned why his reaction was so different while she was dealing with the drunk. As night fell, Kerwin Orwolf discussed with his master Bruffston's crushing victory in the Eastern League preliminaries, where the orc won all 40 fights in just 2 days, each by knockout. Despite this, Kerwin also recalled that Gladiator had a similar performance, so he was certain this year's championship would be great fun. Years ago, Orwolf's master had followed a man through dirty, ruined streets until they reached a gate. Inside, they saw the beastman who would become the celebrated champion of the King of Fists. The master asked if they were in the presence of the voracious wolf, which Kerwin confirmed. The master, instead of settling a score, intended to recruit the fighter to Heractopia, offering wealth and glory. Kerwin made an expression his master hadn't seen in a long time, one that reappeared when the beastman discovered he had 2 worthy rivals in the competition. The next day, Rick and Rionette tried to console Angelica after her stint as a bunny girl, but nothing seemed to change Daimit's furious demeanor. Gladiator mentioned speaking with Snape Resurrect, but Angelica pretended not to know who that was. Later, the group headed to the venue for the next phase, where only one participant from each block would qualify for the final tournament. In the first fight of the block, Helen Thompson faced Angelica Daimit. Angelica started with her signature instant step, but her strong opponent blocked the attack. Despite her tension, Angelica managed to defeat Thompson and advance to the next stage. When it was Rick's turn, he used the 3rd step of the 8 secrets to take it easy. As the hours passed, Gladiator and Angelica kept advancing, maintaining the same intensity until they reached the final rounds. With only 4 fights remaining, neither could afford to lose. Daimit didn't slow down, combining her water wall with the thunderbolt arrow to win her matches. However, her next opponent, Taylor Brid, escaped her tactic unscathed. Surprisingly, the big guy matched her speed and hit her with a powerful punch, ending the fight. After the defeat, Angelica was treated by a nurse. Outside the room, Rick mentioned that her opponent's defensive strength was immense, but she had insisted on a strategy that visibly wore her down. Losing her patience, Angelica stormed off until Rick convinced her to talk calmly. She then confessed that Snape Resurrect was her fiancé, explaining that after her parents died in an accident a year ago, her inexperience led to financial trouble for her family. Her stingy grandfather made a deal with Snape, who offered a truckload of money in exchange for marrying her. Rick finally realized the girl was engaged to the lizard man and was shocked. Angelica added that she had investigated Snape, trying to annul the engagement, and discovered he would become the main sponsor of the event. She was about to finish her thought when a commotion from a nearby bar caught their attention. Inside, Taylor Brid tried to help a girl being attacked by a lizard man, but was taken down with just one blow. The lizard man then turned his fury on the girl, demanding compensation for spilling his beer. Angelica screamed at the lizard man, despite fearing his strength. Just as the creature was about to punch her, Rick shielded his companion. At that moment, Snape appeared and asked Jeeth, his competitor, to hold back until the tournament, which the pugilist did by fleeing the bar. Rick asked who that was, and Snape revealed it was Jeeth Resurrect, his younger brother, a brute who was cocky because no one could stand up to him. Before leaving, Snape expressed his happiness that Angelica was safe, stating that her well-being was his most precious treasure. After the businessman left, Rick questioned the connection between the engagement and Snape being the tournament's main sponsor. Angelica explained that the money exchanged for the engagement was so substantial that after investigating the Argonaut Company, she discovered they had almost nothing. This tournament was Snape's chance to reclaim his fortune, and the event was rigged in his favor to ruin her fiancé's company. Angelica needed to defeat Jeeth, but it seemed impossible. Faced with the challenge, Rick offered to train Angelica.
The next day, Angelica and her mentor start training right away, but the task turns out to be much tougher than she expected. With 60-pound weight strapped to her body, she's told never to deactivate her body-strengthening ability. She demands an explanation for this extreme training, but Rick ignores her and starts running, pulling her along with a rope tied around both their waists. He explains that this forces her to run faster and with more strength while correcting her flawed movements. He points out that while she has acceleration, her stride is unstable. With her hair a mess, Angelica begs Rick to stop, and he jokes that it's the first time she's called him by his name. Too exhausted to comment, she pleads for a break, but Rick insists it's important to push beyond what she thinks are her limits, reassuring her that only 6 hours remain in today's training. Hours later, Angelica collapses face first into the ground, completely drained. Rick comments that this is just how tough training for a second-class knight is, while Angelica thanks God she still has her legs. Rick recalls nearly passing out during his training with Rionette, mentioning he died 3 times on the first day. Hearing this, Angelica proudly declares that she survived her first day without dying, but Rick laughs, reminding her that it's only lunchtime. On the 5th day of training, she enjoys her lunch on a warm sofa, convinced she can't keep up this pace much longer. At least she's found a secluded spot where no one, not even Rick, can bother her. But just as she thinks this, Rick appears at the window, having searched the entire kingdom for her. Frustrated, Angelica complains that it's been less than 15 minutes since she tried to hide. Rick takes the opportunity to have some tea, while Angelica asks when he's going to stop drinking and start scolding her for running away. But Rick surprises her by saying he understands her desire to flee. In fact, he himself ran away dozens of times during his 2 years of grueling training, dying thousands of times in the process. In one of these memories, Brufston finds his pupil dead and borrows mana from a Lycerette to bring him back to life. Confused after dying yet again, Rick learns that the vampire mage has granted Brufston the power to revive him up to 2,000 more times. So he has to keep going. With this memory in mind, Rick tells Angelica that he's gotten used to dying. She's amazed that he endured it for 2 years, and Rick admits that he tried to quit many times. But Brufston always said the right thing, urging him to weigh his current suffering against the regret of giving up. These words helped him see the situation more clearly. Angelica deduces that he chose to endure the suffering, which is true. Rick concludes that even if he had quit, his master would have watched him leave with a smile. For some reason, those words made everything easier to bear. Hearing this, Angelica confesses that she hates the customs of nobility, the pristine outfits, the manners, the heavy makeup, and the ridiculous dances. Despite learning all these things, she always despised every part of those etiquette rules. That's why she decided to contribute to the House of Diamuid as a fighter. Her dream is to become the first special class knight, so she believes her struggles are worth it. With her motivation renewed, Her teacher reminds her that her fighting style is a modified version of the knight sword technique, making her more powerful with a sword in hand. Since the tournament rules require fighting without weapons, Rick suggests she learn a technique to turn her hand into a blade. For that, he brings in a special instructor, Reincarnated. After an intense night of training, it's time for the final match between the C Block leaders, each with 7 wins and 1 loss. Angelica Diarmuid faces Silver Helgen, with the winner advancing to the next round. In the arena, facing her opponent, Angelica trembles with fury like a caged beast. The duo of elders observing the duel comment on her disadvantage against Silver. However, as soon as the announcer signals the start of the fight, Diarmuid delivers a powerful punch that sends her opponent flying against the wall with incredible force, ending the fight and shocking everyone present. From the stands, Reincarnated notices that the training paid off, though Rick thinks the girl might be a bit unhinged from everything she went through. At the Militia Tavern after her victory, Angelica reflects on how the townspeople's stares hurt her, making her wonder if she did something wrong in the tournament. Rick reassures her that winning is what matters, while Reincarnated warns that people might be afraid of her. Alice and Mizette arrive at the tavern, and the elf asks the dwarf what happened to the rumors about one of the 6 jewels being missing. Mizette replies that the rumors led to nothing, as there wasn't a shred of truth in them. Militia comes to serve the newcomers and has to dodge the instant flirtations of the dwarf until Brufston arrives, guided by his loyal squire, Gold. The cat girl blushes at the orc's arrival, which infuriates Mizette. With the table set for a true feast, the wise beast announces that all that's left now is to win the tournament and receive one of the 6 gems. Alice would love to participate in the event, but Rick quickly shuts down the mage's enthusiasm, fearing she might devastate the entire arena. The orc asks who the human at the table is, so Angelica explains that she was trained by Rick and Reincarnated. She admits that many times she felt like she was being tortured rather than taught. Even so, each member of the Orichalcum Fist assures her that her efforts will be rewarded. Thus, the official start of the King of Fists tournament finally arrives, and the pairs are announced after a random draw. In the first match, Herman Muller faces Jeth, a resurrected competitor entered by the event sponsor, the Dragonaut Company. In the second match, Angelica Diarmuid faces Doug Heap. In the third match, Rick Gladiator goes up against Selena Kine, and he's relieved he doesn't have to face his master. Speaking of which, the 5th match will be between Donnie Fisher and Brufston. In the audience, Gold asks Militia to stop making those love-struck faces. The 4th and final match pits Eddie Grace against the 3-time champion, Kerwin Urwolf. The Beastman's master is confident that Urwolf will keep his title no matter who he faces. With the first round pair set, Angelica tells Rick about the organization's plan to cheat. The Dragonaut Company manipulated the bracket, so Jeth wouldn't face Kerwin or Brufston until the final, ensuring the audience would be impressed by their competitor's strength from the start. As the final stages approach and the odds are at their highest, Snape plans to make a clever bet. If Jeth deliberately loses at this point, the boss will make a fortune. That's why Jeth was given the easiest path, including facing Angelica. If he makes it past the first round, her plan is to ruin the sponsor's scheme by defeating their competitor in the second match. Rick asks what Angelica would do if she doesn't face Jeth until the final, but she hasn't even thought about that. After the bracket is divided, Kerwin and his master meet Rick and Brufston. The Orichalcum Fist members confidently declare they will take the belt home, along with the gem thereafter. Unfazed, Urwolf's master recalls when his pupil was younger. Back then, his academy had only managed to get one competitor to 4th place in the tournament. He put his new fighter up against the reigning champion, and Kerwin took a beating. But that taste of defeat drove him to train until he reached his physical peak. Now, 6 years later, the pugilist faces the greatest challenge of his life. The first round begins with Jeth Resurrect facing Herman Muller. The human lands several hits on the monster, but Jeth feels nothing due to his above-average resistance. After missing a strike, Jeth even hears a taunt from his opponent. But as soon as Herman attacks again, the monster responds with a single, powerful blow, taking him out instantly. Rick finds this strange because, despite Jeth's strength, his movements are amateurish. But Angelica reminds him that the fight was meant to impress the bettors, and it succeeded. Next, Angelica enters the arena and easily wins her fight, while Rick and Brufston also advance without any trouble. Now it's time for the final match of the first round, with Eddie Grace facing the current champion. The orichalcum fist watches closely to gauge Kerwin's strength, which he demonstrates from the start. Rick notes that Urwolf anticipated his opponent's move, and Brufston adds that the excellent sense of smell of a dogman gives him this ability, known as future scent. Despite the praise, the champion takes a hard hit, which Ryanet claims was intentional. After taking the hit, Kerwin gets up and knocks out his rival, and the audience breathes a sigh of relief after seeing their favorite fighter in danger. To Rick's surprise, he hears one of the champion's colleagues comment that Kerwin is too inconsistent. A day later, the second round begins, with the audience split between betting on Kerwin Urwolf and Jeth Resurrect. Snape approaches Rick and formally introduces himself to the group. Alice comments that Jeth is overdoing it with his act, which embarrasses the businessman. Mizet explains that adults have to pretend to be adults all the time, and the vampire realizes that life for non-children can be quite harsh. Rick asks why Snape isn't in the VIP seats, and Snape explains that he wants to see the fight between his fiancée and his youngest up close. Speaking of them, the two meet before the match, and Jeth says his brother asked him not to mess up his future wife's face. Angelica is eager to show the results of her training, while Jeth laughs, saying he's still stronger despite only spending his father's money on nonsense. Angelica argues that it's impossible for Jeth to have such a physique without training, but he dodges the question, saying some people call him a prodigy. Either way, he promises not to crush her, so she can still carry Snape's children later. Offended by this insult, Angelica vows to defeat him. The match begins, and Angelica starts with a flying kick to Jeth's torso, but he doesn't feel the impact. Unlike Herman, however, Angelica has the speed to avoid taking hits. As she suspected, her physical attacks don't work against Jeth, so she cancels her enhancement magic, leaving the audience speechless. She then uses magic flow reverse reflection, advances with instant step, and finishes with a new technique she learned called thread cut, where her hand mimics a sword and slices open Jeth's belly. Rick boosts his students' confidence as Ryanet explains a special technique for controlling the body. During training, Ryanet showed Angelica how to use it on a stone, making Angelica feel like she could never do it herself. But Angelica's desire to learn was so strong that she pushed aside her doubts and focused on Ryanet's instructions, determined to master the move. She even invented her own method, combining magic flow with reverse reflection. Mizet reminds Angelica that this technique releases stored energy from the body in a powerful burst through the mind. Rick adds that the intense training Angelica went through has prepared her body to handle this kind of impact. Ryanet concludes that no one else can use the thread cut technique like Angelica because she combines it with her unique instant step move. Using this strategy again, Angelica charges at her opponent and creates another slash across his abdomen, making him even angrier. The reptile, Jeth, punches the ground, raising a cloud of dust to block her vision. He tries to catch her off guard, but Angelica is too quick and dodges his attack. She then uses the same tactic and slices Jeth's head off. Snape, watching from the sidelines, finds the technique interesting but doesn't seem too worried about his fighter's condition. Jeth, tired of holding back, raises more dust and lands a powerful blow on Angelica. He even apologizes to Snape for going too far but admits he couldn't resist such a thrilling fight. Snape knows Jeth can be temperamental at times, but Angelica gets back up and assures him she's still in the fight. Angelica tries the thread cut again, but this time, Jeth hits her with his tail effortlessly. Determined, Angelica keeps using the technique, but Jeth loses patience and reveals that he's learned to replicate her instant step after watching her do it. Now moving at the same speed as Angelica, Jeth lands another blow, slamming her against the wall. He taunts her, saying there's nothing better than crushing a weak opponent into complete humiliation. Rick starts to worry about Angelica. Snape comments that his brother Jeth's strength is truly extraordinary, having known him since their childhood. Jeth was adopted at 8 years old and trained with Snape, even defeating him in their first match. Jeth is a natural-born prodigy, perfect for combat. In the arena, Jeth continues mocking Angelica, saying her years of training were worthless and that her parents, who are dead, must have passed on nothing but weakness to her. Snape tells Rick that Angelica might think the fights are rigged, but Snape insists there's no need for tricks. Instead, Snape bet a large sum on Jeth because he was an unknown fighter, meaning Snape could make a huge profit. Meanwhile, Jeth defeats Angelica in the arena, and the crowd starts to frown at what they're seeing. Rick thinks Angelica is at her limit, but she refuses to give up. Even though she can barely stand, she insists she won't lose. Jeth, now motivated to crush her spirit, lifts Angelica by her hair, wanting to show that no amount of hard work can defeat a natural prodigy like him. Angelica struggles to keep her hope alive, but she's so weak that she can't even land a hit on Jeff. In response, Jeff throws her against the wall and reveals his claws, intending to kill her. Rick jumps up and shouts that the match is over, but Jeff charges at Angelica with all his fury. Just as he's about to strike her with his fangs, an object hits his arm, making him miss. The announcer declares the fight over, and Jeff looks at the shoe that was thrown at him, wondering who dared to do that. When he looks at the crowd, Rick is standing there missing one shoe and filled with rage. Without a second thought, Rick heads toward the arena to retrieve his shoe, but Jeff steps in his way, commenting that Rick must be up to something. Rick doesn't respond, easily dodges Jeeth's attempt to kick him, and ties shoe back on. Then, Rick tells Jeff to wait because what's coming next is well-deserved. Jeff, full of excitement, punches the wall, eager for his upcoming duel. Rick steps into the arena and easily defeats Jeff. After his victory, Rick immediately goes to check on Angelica Diamowitz, who had fought Jeff earlier. The doctor tells Rick that Angelica is hurt pretty badly from her battle, and it will take some time for her to recover. However, she's not in any life-threatening danger. Hearing this, Rick thinks about how frustrating it must be for Angelica, who trained so hard for her dream, only to be knocked out like this. While Rick is dealing with his thoughts, Brufston also moves forward in the competition without any trouble. Later, Kerwin Orville faces Mylene, a boxer known for her super fast kicks. Mylene nearly wins, but in a moment of distraction, Kerwin slams her head into the sand, ending the fight. Even though Kerwin wins easily, his master can tell that he's not at his best. Now, only 4 fighters remain ready to compete for the championship belt tomorrow. The next day, Rick wakes up early to train and then meets Angelica in the arena. She apologizes to Rick for wasting his time, thinking she has no talent. Now that she's lost, she feels like she rebelled against her noble background for no reason. She even starts thinking that marrying Snape might not be so bad because at least he would take care of her, and she wouldn't have to work so hard. Rick, however, feels like he owes her an apology for not realizing how strong Jeff Resurrect was. He then asks her to watch his next fight with Jeff closely. When the fight begins, Jeff mocks Angelica, saying he should have killed her so she wouldn't have to live a miserable life. This makes Rick very angry, and he punches Jeff in the face, surprising him. Jeff tries to fight back but is hit again, coughing up blood. Angelica is amazed that Rick's punches are actually hurting Jeff, who usually seems invincible. Mizette explains that Rick is using a special technique called the penetrating attack, which targets the inside of the body, not the outside. Jeff doesn't give up and uses his Dragonkin ability called Dragon Force, which makes him stronger and faster. Watching this, Brufston guesses that this move probably uses up a lot of Jeeth's magical energy, and Snape adds that Jeeth never really trained to handle that much power. Rick tries another penetrating attack, but this time Jeff uses Iron Body to protect himself. With Dragon Force and Iron Body, Jeff seems to be winning, landing several blows on Rick. But as Jeeth gets tired from attacking, Rick reveals that he barely took any damage thanks to another technique called Fluid Strike, which spreads out the force of the blows across his body. Jeff accuses Rick of holding back on purpose, and Rick admits that he limited his strength during the fight to match Angelica's level, trying to show her what she could achieve. Brufston explains that winning isn't Rick's only goal, he also wants to inspire Angelica. Rick warns Jeff to calm down because pushing himself too hard could backfire. But Jeff is determined not to lose, so he uses all his strongest moves, turning into a powerful war machine. He attacks Rick again, but Rick counters with one more penetrating attack, shattering all of Jeff's abilities. Jeff is left exhausted and vulnerable. Rick points out that Jeff has never pushed himself to the point of exhaustion and doesn't know how to handle it. Rick believes that true strength comes from enduring and overcoming exhaustion. Frustrated, Jeff keeps fighting, but Rick is now in complete control. Rick taunts Jeff, saying he's just a level 1 prodigy who relies on natural talent, while true prodigies work hard to reach unimaginable levels of power. Furious, Jeff uses his most powerful magic, Dragon Recordian, which makes him nearly invincible. Rick realizes that Angelica couldn't have beaten Jeff at this level, but he still encourages her to keep training because life will throw challenges her way that she can't run from. With that, Rick moves at incredible speed, using a technique that Angelica could master if she keeps training. In the end, Jeff creates a sandstorm to blind Rick, but Rick uses a move called Thread Cut, even though he's not sure if it will work. When the dust settles, Jeff is seriously wounded, and the fight is over.